Hey everyone, this is Matt Hendricks with the Sharpening Guy LLC, and today I'm going to show you how to keep your knife sharp for longer in between sharpenings using a Japanese Waterstone. Okay, so you can divide knives into roughly two categories: hard steel knives and soft steel knives. Now, of course, you can divide them a lot more ways than that, and these aren't technical terms, but here's what I mean by that. The hardness of a knife blade is measured on the Rockwell C scale. Now, if you look online, a lot of times if you're buying a knife, you'll see it will say HRC and then it will have a number on it. The HRC basically stands for Rockwell C scale. Now, I consider hard knives to be about 60 and over on the Rockwell C scale, and soft steel knives to be 60 or below, with 60 kind of being the pivot point. Now, just to give you some points of reference, a decent Western style knife like a Wusthof or a Hinkle is probably going to be somewhere around HRC 58. Whereas, an entry-level Japanese knife is probably going to be in the low 60s, maybe 61, 62. Some of the best Japanese knives are going to be in the mid-60s, more like 63, 64, 65. And then some lower-end knives are going to be in the mid-50s, so 55, 56-ish. Okay, now here's why this matters. If you have what I consider a soft steel knife, so below HRC 60, then you can use a smooth steel to keep your knife sharp for longer between sharpenings. And it's easier to use in Japanese Waterstone. I'm not saying it's better, but it is easier for most people. However, if your knife is above HRC 60, then the smooth steel isn't really going to work for you, so using the Waterstone is really going to be the best method for you. Now sure, some people use either like a diamond rod or a ceramic rod or something like that. On harder knives, I don't recommend doing this. First of all, because the knives are harder, they are also more brittle, so the high localized pressure of a round rod can cause chipping. I have seen this happen. And also, I just don't feel that a ceramic rod or a diamond rod or a grooved rod or something like that leaves near as good an edge as you can get by touching your knife up with a fine Japanese Waterstone. Okay, so now that you've decided that you're going to touch up your knife using a Japanese Waterstone to keep it sharp for longer in between sharpenings, what type of Waterstone do you need? So, anywhere really between like 4,000 grit and 8,000 grit would be fine. Probably even down to 3,000 grit actually. Personally, for all around use, I recommend a 6,000 grit. That's just my preference. If you prefer a 5,000 or a 4,000 or an 8,000, that's fine. Now, there's two types of Waterstones. Well, there's more than two, but there's two that I'm going to talk to you about. One, they're soaking stones. These stones you put in a bucket of water, and with fine stones you usually don't have to leave them there for that long. With a 6,000 grit, probably soaking it for 4 or 5 minutes is plenty before you use it. Although some of them, like this stone, can live in water. Not all stones can. Some stones are actually damaged if you leave them in the water for too long, so be aware of that. Although this particular stone, I just leave in the water all the time, so it's always ready for me. Now, the other type of stone is a splash and go stone. And what that means is instead of soaking it before you use it like this stone, you simply get this stone out, you splash water on the surface, and you can use it immediately. You never have to soak this stone. In fact, it would be bad if you did soak this stone. Now, the other thing is there's different types of stones. For instance, this is a more traditional stone, this soaking stone, and this particular one is called a Shaped glass stone, and it has a ceramic abrasive, and it's physically much harder than this stone. Now, I should mention that you also can get splash and go stones that are more traditional, like this stone, only they don't require soaking, like this particular stone right here. And just so you know, this stone is an Arishiyama 6,000 grit. And this stone is a King Ice Bear 6,000 grit, and this is a Shaped glass stone 6,000 grit. Now, that being said, some people also use a natural stone to as the last step in sharpening or to keep their knife sharp between sharpenings. For most people, I do not recommend this because you have to be careful with how you care for natural stones and stuff like that. So I'm not going to go into it here, but if it's something you're interested in, you could look into it farther. Now, the one last thing about stones is some of them come with a base and some of them don't. So, for instance, this stone that I was just showing you does not come with a base. It's just a stone. And again, same with the Sharpened glass stone. Now, some stones, like this natural stone I showed a minute ago, or this one, which is the Kitayama 8000 grit stone, you can see these both have wooden bases on them. And what this does for you is this gets the stone up off of your countertop or off of wherever you set it, so that you don't hit your knuckles on the counter when you have the knife on the stone, when you're using it. Now, just because your stone doesn't come with a base, though, doesn't mean that's a bad thing. For instance, this stone without a base, I made a wooden base that the stone sits in like this, and so if I want to use this on my counter, I can, and I still don't hit my knuckles. Also, if you don't want to make a base, you can buy bases. This is a plastic one. This one is actually lighter than I would prefer. You can buy rubberized ones so that I think weigh a little bit more. Or you can buy sink bridges that kind of span the gap of your sink so that you can set the stone over it, which makes it nice when you're using water stones. And this is not adjusted for this particular stone, but basically it sits in and then this piece moves to clamp this stone in. So anyway, you could buy an adjustable base, you could make your own, or you could buy a stone that comes with one. Now keep in mind that if you buy a stone with a wooden base, preferably that would not be a soaking stone. That being said, there are some stones that I've seen that come attached to plastic bases, and so those you could obviously soak just fine. Okay, so now that you know what different types of stones are available, I'm just going to show you my setup here. I just have a board over this water bucket, and I have a rag on it that keeps my water stone from sliding. Most of the water stones I use do not have bases, so this works very well for me, and this is also very similar to a traditional Japanese setup. I like it because I can just splash water over it and the water, can fall off the stone, the excess, and also I don't have to worry about getting stones elevated because this board elevates enough over the side of the tub that I don't hit my knuckles when I use it. Now, you could put a board like this over your sink. They actually sell sink bridges, so you could go buy one of those that are made of either like plastic or aluminum or something like that, that go over your sink and are specifically made for this, although honestly a board works just fine. Or you can use a base like I showed you a minute ago and just set your stone on the counter and just put a towel under it to keep it from sliding and also to prevent water from spilling all over your counter. So, regardless of whether using a soaking stone like this or a splash and go stone like this, you want to keep your stone wet like this while you're using it. So again, different stones require different amounts of soaking or not, so make sure you understand what your stone needs. I'm going to be demonstrating with this stone. This is a King Ice Bear 6000 grit stone. I believe it runs roughly around $30. You do not need a more expensive stone. If you want one, that's fine. I'm not claiming this is the best stone ever made or anything, because it's not, but it's perfectly adequate. I should point out that having success when you're doing this, you have to understand that it really is 99% technique and how you do it, and then once you have that part down, then the stone matters. So, that being said, let's look at a couple knives. So this is a very traditional Japanese knife. This particular one was made by Murray Carter. And you'll see that up here on the blade, you can see marks from the hammering and the forge, by the way, but up here on the blade is basically parallel. But then it's ground with these big bevels starting here, going down to the edge, and that's on each side, and then it has a little micro bevel on each side that's actually the edge bevel. So you have the edge bevel and then the back bevel, which is these wide ones, and then this here is like the original blade thickness. Okay? Now this is a very traditional double bevel Japanese knife. Now, that being said, you can also use this technique with Western knives. So let's just take a look at one of those quick. This is a Western style chef's knife. This one is actually smaller than a lot of them. It's about 6 inches, 8 inches would be kind of standard. But regardless, it has the same sort of blade grind. It's thickest at the spine, and then it kind of gradually tapers down as it gets to the edge, and just gets thinner as it goes along. Now still, if I tilt this right into light, you can see down here, there's still thinning done right behind the edge. It's not near as tall as was on the Japanese knife I just showed you, but it's still there. So this knife still has a back bevel and still has an edge bevel. And if you bring me a knife like this to sharpen, it will have a back bevel and an edge bevel like this when it goes home. It may not have both of them when it comes from the factory, but if I sharpen them and thin it out properly like this, then it will. So, that being said, how do you find the right angle? The easiest way to find the right angle is to lay your blade flat on your stone and push down on the back bevel like this. Okay? What this does, I don't know if you'll be able to see this or not, but when I push down on the back bevel, it raises the spine up and it makes it so the back bevel, or this big wide one, is flat on the stone. Okay? So I'm not on the edge bevel, I'm just on the back bevel. And I should point out that if you had a patina or something on the back bevel you wanted to get rid of, you could just push down on the back bevel and sharpen like this, and that would clean up that patina. Now, to find the edge bevel, essentially, once you're pushing down on the back bevel, you raise the knife up a little bit from there. You don't want to go too much, but just a little bit, like this. Now, if you do that, you should be about where the edge bevel is. Now there's a few different ways you could check. You could take a marker, like a Sharpie, and just mark over part of the edge bevel, and then find your angle, take one stroke, and look and see if all the marker was removed. The other way, if you have good eyesight, is you can see when the shadow just disappears, or when it first disappears under the edge bevel when you raise the knife up. And the moment it disappears, that's when you're at the exact angle for the edge bevel. Okay? Now, on a Western style knife, you essentially find it the same way, except the back bevel is smaller. So you push down on the back bevel until the back bevel is flat, and then you raise up slightly from there, and all the same things apply. You will find that with Western style knives, you'll be at a little greater angle than you are at with a true Japanese knife. Now that you've found the angle, we're actually going to start touching up the knife. Now, I want to point out that this is not really a full sharpening. So if your knife is already dull, if it's already feeling dull, this probably won't fix it. You want to do this when your knife is still sharp and still cutting fairly well. And this will just bring it back to peak sharpness and prevent it from getting duller after that. Now, if you do this regularly, if you cook professionally once a day or more, if you just cook at home once or twice a week would probably be good, but of course it just depends on how much you cook. But if you do this often enough, it will keep your knife sharp for a lot longer between sharpenings, but eventually your knife will still need a full sharpening. This will not work forever, but it will greatly extend the time between full sharpenings. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure our stone's wet, and we're going to find the angle of our edge bevel. Okay? Now that we found the angle, we are going to push away from the edge, so using a stropping motion, because we're not going towards the edge of the blade, we're going away from the edge, so edge trailing. And then we're going to flip the blade over, and we're going to do the same thing on the other side. And we're going to alternate like this. Now, I prefer to start at the tip and then go to the heel of the blade, but you could also do it the other way. But I'm more comfortable doing it this way. Now, you're going to do 5 to 10 alternating strokes, and if your knife is in good enough shape, that should be enough. So once you've done your 5 to 10 alternating strokes, you're just going to make sure there's not any grit from the stone on your blade or anything, and you're going to get a soft piece of wood or a soft piece of plastic. A cork works fine. I've heard of people using pencil eraser successfully. And anyway, you're just going to lightly, with just the weight of the blade, pull the blade through the wood once or maybe twice, like this. That just pulls off any wire edge that may have formed. Then, after that, you take 1 or 2 more alternating strokes just to make sure the edge is lined up. I should mention that all of this is done with light pressure. I'm not pushing hard at all. It's basically just the weight of the blade. Now after that, you can dry your blade off. And if you did it right, your blade should be brought back to peak sharpness. It should be able to slice paper easily, shave hair, cut through tomatoes, onion skins, whatever. And if you hold it up to the light, you should not see any light reflect off the blade, because since it's coming to a point, there's no surface for the light to reflect off of. So, with the Western style blade, it's basically the same thing. You find your angle, and in this case it's this, which if you noticed is a little bit higher than we were on the Carter, and you just take your 5 to 10 alternating backward strokes like this. Make sure your stone stays wet if it's dried out. Be careful not to gouge the tip of the knife into the stone, especially if you have a soaking stone, as they tend to be softer. If you have something like a Sharpenings glass stone, it's a much harder stone, so it's harder to gouge, although not impossible. So you take your 5 to 10 alternating strokes with light pressure, pull your blade through a soft piece of wood once or twice, and then take the 1 or 2 more alternating strokes just to make sure everything lines up. At this point, dry your blade off and proceed with whatever it is you were doing with it, cooking, cutting rope, whatever it may be. Now this technique also works just fine with folding knives, hunting knives, etc. So again, you just wet your stone, find your back bevel, and from there you can find your edge bevel. Okay, and once you find your edge bevel, take 5 to 10 alternating strokes. Again, going away from the edge. That's really important. You do not want to cut into the edge. You want to go away from the edge as if you're stropping the blade. Now once you do your 5 to 10 alternating strokes, just pull through a piece of wood a couple times. Nice soft clean piece to cut the burr off. And then 1 or 2 more strokes on each side, alternating, just to make sure everything lines up. Now I should mention that this is how I finish. I do not strop afterwards. I do not want to put my knife on a leather strop or a fabric strop or anything soft that would round the edge over, because then the knife would not have much bite. I want the cutting edge of the knife to come to a sharp point and remain nice and triangular and not rounded over. That way you can have an edge that's smooth enough to shave with, but it still, because it comes to that point, has plenty of bite for cutting through things like tomatoes if it was a kitchen knife, or rope if it's a pocket knife like this, or for skinning something if you're a hunter and you have a hunting knife. So a couple other things before we finish up. If you have a stainless steel knife like this, you can just dry it off and put it away. You don't have to worry about it too much. Yes, stainless steel still has carbon in it, but unless you leave it wet or leave it with acids on it from foods, it's going to be fine. That being said, if you have a carbon steel knife, or if you have a laminated knife like this one, and this is a 3-layer laminate with a carbon steel core and stainless steel on either side, then you should oil your knife before you put it away to prevent the edge from oxidizing. I would recommend using a proper blade oil like camellia oil, which happens to be food safe, because vegetable oils can be acidic and they can also go rancid over time. So to oil the blade, I just have this rag I use, and I keep it in a plastic bag, seeing as I oil blades a lot down in my shop. And that just prevents the oil from evaporating from it. But anyway, just spray the rag. You don't need much, just a light coating will do. And then I just wipe the knife blade off. I usually wrap it over the spine and wipe it that way. And then to do the edge, I just kind of lay the blade flat on the rag and just pull away from the edge so that there's no chance of cutting into the rag to do that. And that's all there is to it. Now this knife is ready to go. Also, there is one more important point. The process I showed you today works great for double beveled knives. Whether it's a double bevel Japanese knife, a double bevel Western knife, whatever, it works. But if you have a single bevel knife, this will not work, and you will have to use a little bit different technique. So just keep that in mind, that as long as you have a standard double bevel knife, this will work for you and you're good to go. But if you have a single bevel knife, not so much. So I hope this helps you know how to maintain your knives effectively at home. This is not a replacement for a full sharpening, but it will extend the time between full sharpenings if you do this properly. And one great benefit of that is that your knife will last longer because you're removing less steel from it. So anyway, I hope this helps. I'm Matt Hendricks from the Sharpening Guy LLC. Thanks for watching.